Friends,
Romans,
Greeks,
lend us your ears.
And a huge thank you to all of our Patreons.
Thank you to the Pit Fighters, the First Swords, and all of the Bright Stars, Truth and Courage.
Hello and welcome to the channel today. I'm Will, this is my brother Ed, and today we're going into a deep dive for a historical period. We might do a few of these. We feel like we've read between us quite a lot of books based around ancient history.
At least three.
And so today we'll be going over, I believe there's 10. We didn't do that on purpose, just 10 popped out into our minds that we really think that if they're the first historical books you've read or you're a veteran of the genre, I think these are books that anyone across that lens will really enjoy. We've got 2 non-fiction, 8 fiction, so a mix of historical fiction and non-fiction. For some more non-fiction, I really recommend checking out Michael Kist's channel. But for the ones that we're talking about today, let's get into it. Many of these are some of our favourite books of all time. So talking about favourite books, Ed, let's get into the first one.
The first one is actually my book of the year, 2022.
Wow.
Yeah.
Read it quite a while ago, but...
Which is Amanda Scott's Boudica, Dreaming the Eagle. So obviously we're looking at ancient history and classic history as well. This book is focused on, I know, Boudica, which is when the Romans invaded Britain, and Boudica was the chief of the Iceni, the queen of the Iceni, and she rose up to lead a rebellion against them. And it's a 4-book series, and the way that it goes through Boudica and her half-brother Ban, their journeys with the Romans, against the Romans, is just supreme. Her writing is some of the most beautiful and impactful I've ever read. The relationships that these characters have with each other are just so heartfelt and powerful. And I think this book has everything that a historical fiction lover will want in a book, because it is so epic at times as well as intimate. It is a very small cast, but their actions change so much in the world. And it's just an incredible book that left me weeping many times. And I am a weeper.
You're a weeper.
This one made me a really big weeper.
Yeah. And it's a book that I would particularly recommend to those who read a lot of fantasy and want some more historical fiction on their piles, because this is the most epic feeling historical fiction series out there. And as Ed said, it feels really intimate, but it's got an epic backdrop. And so it feels great. It feels like there's very high consequences for the characters and their actions, and the payoff is unreal, whether that's in terms of pumping your fists in the air in joy or weeping and staining the pages with your tears. It's okay, let's not bring that up, but that is the first one. What a book to kick the list off with.
I'm not going to kick any list,
but let's dive into the next one. I've got Circe, or how do you pronounce it, Ed?
No, we're not doing this because every video we say it.
By Madeline Miller. I don't think this book needs any introduction.
Circe.
It has kind of taken the world by storm and not invented the mythological retelling, but it's given it a new lease of life, I think. Of course, it started Song of Achilles was quite a few years before, but personally, I preferred this. I really enjoy it. It's a lot more intimate, and of course,
that mythological retelling didn't start with Song of Achilles, though. It started a long time before.
No, but I'm saying the recent wave.
Oh, okay.
I think Song of Achilles is possibly the best-selling, and this as well, of that ilk. Would you agree or not?
Yeah, I would, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's given it a new lease of life, and we've been seen in the last decade 30, 40, 50 different retellings, which I need to read them all. That's a hard thing to do, though. But I really enjoyed this because it's also a part of Greek mythology that hasn't had many retellings before. As a character, she kind of fades into the background. Of course, she's present in the Odyssey. I wonder who will play her in the Christopher Nolan film coming out in a few years. But it's a story with very lovely prose that is very accessible, small cast of characters. It's moving and emotional, and I think it's just very well written and very well put together.
For someone who's interested in Greek mythology, then this book is basically the multiverse of madness, but the ancient Greek version, because everyone crops up.
They're just there.
Everyone's there. Almost everyone, isn't it? Like anyone you've read a myth about in terms of Greek mythology, they will crop up in Circe. So,
because the ones that aren't there, you hear about. Yeah, and so there we go. That is Circe.
The next one was actually my book of the year, 2024. So maybe this is my favourite genre.
Maybe it is. Maybe.
It is Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Leonard. Now, this book is something that I'd recommend to everyone. Sometimes we'd recommend a book just for, diehard lovers of historical fiction or, people who are obsessed with Greek mythology and whatnot. But this book is something that could be tackled, read, enjoyed, loved by everyone, just anyone who reads. Because even though it's set in Syracuse in, I believe, the 5th century BCE, that it's not written with a focus on historical detail. It's more about these two characters, their relationships, and how they just want to put on a play, because it is about these two potters who are obsessed with Euripides, who is an Athenian playwright, and they want to host a play in one of their amphitheatres, and they use some Athenian soldiers who have recently been defeated by the Syracusan army, and they're just kind of being chained up in this theatre, waiting to basically starve to death. And these characters give them some purpose, but it's really interesting, the character study of what these two characters get up to, why are their reasons for putting on this play, the people they meet along the way. And this book was so emotional. It's one of those books that had me laughing out loud one chapter and then crying the next. And I think you'll probably see a pattern with me, that if I say I love a book, it's because I connected to it on an emotional level as well, which is, I think, always what I'm after. I want to be utterly obsessed with this book. I read this on holiday and I just couldn't put it down for 2 days. I didn't want to talk to anyone.
And the way you insisted
so good.
I need to read it was different than you do with a lot of books. I knew this was kind of a higher level for you, and it's my second favourite read of 2024.
There we go.
For our deeper thoughts, you can check out our review.
Yes, and it's a very short book. I think it won Waterstone's debut of the year.
It did.
So it's doing very, very well at the moment, and Ferdia Leonard definitely deserves this success.
He really does, and I will read whatever he puts up next, because he's shown himself to be a wonderful writer.
Yeah.
Next up, I have got another Greek retelling, and my favourite of the bunch.
This is the best.
It is The Silence of the Gales by Pat Barker. It is a retelling of the War of Troy, but from the perspective of Briseis, and so it's a feminist retelling of this Greek tale.
Mm-hmm.
And oh my gosh, it ripped my heart out and stamped on it, but then also put it back in for some nice warm moments, which are very few and far between. I'd say, of course, very different, but a little bit similar to a series we'll talk about maybe later, the Wolf Den trilogy, in that we have a character with very little agency, and a lot of the story is about crafting these relationships, meaningful relationships with people in the same position, and also the power struggle with those who own them, because Briseis is a slave, and it is a very hard content matter in The Silence of the Gales, and it is not for the faint of heart, but it is a book that is very rewarding, and I just think it's one of the best things ever written. The psychological examination is just so powerful, and it just speaks to me. It's a book that many try to look at the human condition and what makes us tick and what makes us human. Many fail to do that in a way that feels organic and natural, but this is one of the rare ones that succeeded, in my opinion.
Yeah, and to me, this is the best prose I've ever read. Her style of writing is just at an all-time high here, and it's also I would say probably one of the darkest books I've ever read, especially as Greek myth retellings go. This book doesn't hold back whatsoever, and I think that brutal honesty as to how were these women really treated is I will never be able to read the Odyssey or the Iliad the same. This book has changed that for me.
So for some gritty ancient historical read, you've got The Silence of the Gales.
The next one for me is very gritty as well. This is a military historical fiction, and in my opinion, the best military historical fiction out there. It's a standalone. It's called Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield,
which we also have a review of on the channel.
We also do. This book, to me, is a masterpiece of literature. It's a feat that Stephen Pressfield managed to accomplish, writing about the Battle of Thermopylae in such an exciting, visceral, incredible way. We follow the Spartans, and Stephen Pressfield goes about writing the Spartans. He contributes to the myth of these incredible warriors. The name that they have today. That is probably slowly changing, I reckon. Maybe 20 years ago, it was very different about how we saw the Spartans. But he also paints them as people, and he doesn't paint them as kind of fantastical people. He paints them as real.
They're real
people who have this brotherhood that is this unbreakable bond through sacrifice that I don't think anyone could have without going through what these people go through. There are people you hate in this book, there are people you love, and by the end you are cheering them on, you're desperate for them to succeed. But we all know the story of Thermopylae, and that is maybe one reason why this book is so great as well, because you know that it's futile. It's futile for them. It's not futile for what they're doing. But Gates of Fire is just so powerful. The prose, again, is incredible. I found myself highlighting so many passages. And Stephen Pressfield is just a remarkable writer. I don't know anyone who can kind of have this archaic way of storytelling mixed with almost kind of a modern lens, where it feels like if you change the characters' names, you know, the place names and their equipment, it would feel like a modern military fiction, you know, fiction novel. But it's just incredible. It's actually required reading in, I believe, the US Navy, or it was anyway. So it's very important.
Yeah, it's rooted in reality. And what I find is when we think of the ancient Greeks, we often think of philosophy. And that is present in Gates of Fire. As you said, Ed, it's rooted in reality, it's gritty, it's dark, and the characters are very real and visceral. But also there's this philosophy of the desire to attach ourselves to something greater and what that means, the idea of the greater good, and how far will we go to keep to that. So the idea of duty is powerful and prevalent in Gates of Fire, and I love how Stephen Pressfield engages with it. So a bit of a philosophical read, but not too much where it takes away from the story.
There's a lot of blood too.
There's a lot of blood. Next up, going to the Romans. I've got The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper. As I said earlier, it reminds me a bit of The Silence of the Gales, some of the same strengths in the idea that we have a character who is also a slave, Amara, in Pompeii in the 1st century.
Zero
AD.
agency.
Yeah, so a little bit of agency, a bit that can be used to create good, and there is an idea of hope that potentially she can get out of this situation that she's in. But it's a very small, faint hope. So fragile, even saying its name could break it. A false hope,
right, Russell Crowe.
A bit of stealing from Gladiator there.
Yeah.
Could break it.
Well, Marcus Aurelius says it.
Yeah, he does. And The Wolf Den, I think that Elodie Harper has wonderful prose, and the power in this story is the sisterhood that is formed. Characters who are in a similar situation, for their own good, they could turn against each other, but the bonds that they craft, it's just shown and shines through the page. And I recommend this as a whole, as a series, because this was a 5-star, 5.5 stars if I could give it that. And then book 2 is 10 out of 10, 11 out of 10.
Book 2 is one of the best books I've ever read.
And then book 3, the series ends so well as well. Personally, I think the second installment of this series is one of the best middle books of all time, and it's my favourite of the series, but I love all 3. It's a rare series which I think is just consistent from beginning to end. There is no weak part, and the story of Amara is one that I will always remember, and I think about frequently, even though I finished this series about 8 months ago. It's one of those that leaves a long-lasting impression.
And before we move on to non-fiction, my last one is The King Must Die by Mary Renault. Mary Renault really started this Greek mythological retelling, extravaganza, really. And I believe she was writing in the 50s, and this book, The King Must Die specifically, is about Theseus, the Minotaur, Knossos on Crete. I actually went to Crete and read it there, which was amazing.
That's
that
cool.
was such a cool feeling. But this book, Mary Renault is such a fantastic writer. She goes into so much depth into the way that these characters thought and the way that they acted, the cultures around them as well. I really was fascinated with the Minoan cultures that she wrote about, their festivals, and she's just such a great writer in terms of prose, in terms of character. I found it really easy to connect to these characters, which really sometimes if you think a book was written in the 50s, would I connect to it? We have different morals, maybe different values, different, it's a different culture now to when they were writing. But it's such a brilliant book. It's crafted really well. The action was intense. The characters were great. The relationships were brilliant as well. And I just loved reading about these cultures. And imagine reading that at the time. It must have felt so new, exciting, fresh, that not many authors were writing about these Greek myths in such a way that Mary Renault was. I've only read 2 books by her. The other one was her Alexander book, which I don't think is as strong as The King Must Die. The King Must Die, her writing is just superb.
Very nice, and I need to read that by Mary Renault. And then last up in the fiction that I've got is The Gates of Athens by Con Iggulden. This somehow has Marathon and Thermopylae in the same book and does a wonderful job of both. I was a bit worried about reading The Gates of Athens because I adored The Gates of Fire so much. And I thought, someone else doing Thermopylae, and you're not even dedicating the whole book to it.
Yeah.
But Con Iggulden does something very different here. Of course, clues in the title, we're centred in Athens, which is seen as democratic for the day. Of course, it isn't in today's lens. But I really enjoyed looking at the political machinations of Athens as compared to the other Greek states. And we follow 3 central characters here who they all have motivations that when you're in their head, you're like, you know what? You're right. I want you to prevail here. And then you go to the next and you agree with them and the next. And you understand why they stand against each other as well from a philosophical point of view and their own motivations and desires. Of course, Thermopylae, Marathon, these are tales that have been used to inspire people over millennium, standing against great odds. The history is a bit more complicated about that. It wasn't all everyone kind of holding hands and standing against a tyrannical enemy. It wasn't quite like that, but it is still inspirational, and I love the way this story is told. It has a magical quality to it, which, I don't know, it's something I can only describe as the X Factor, a bit like with Gates of Fire. It keeps gritty and dark and rooted in reality, where you know everything could go wrong from a switch of a light, really, from a drop of a shield, you might say.
Nice.
But it also has this magical ethereal quality circling it, which I just don't know how they both go together and they don't jar with each other. The tone and atmosphere just fits perfectly. And Con Iggulden, I think this is his best writing that I found. It's the perfect balance of immersion with the facts of the period, but then also keeping the story driving forwards. And I'd also say my favourite character work of his. 3 standout characters.
I was going to say, these 3 characters are, like, you could easily go wrong with writing 3 famous characters. Xanthippus, Aristides the Just, Themistocles, these great philosophers, these great democrats. And it could have gone so wrong. But the way that Con Iggulden balances them, juggles them, gives them different personalities, but not in a caricature of each other, it's just fantastic. And I love the way that their relationships play out because they know each other very well. I mean, Xanthippus is the main focal point of this book. And he is such an intriguing character. His mindset, he feels very unique, especially unique to the historical fiction genre, where, you know, lots of historical fiction is about, you know, let's say maybe the Bernard Cornwell type is about a very strong very strong masculine figure who's all about, you know, kind of argy-bargy his way through. But these characters are taken in a different way. I also love Bernard Cornwell, but we'll talk about him in another video.
We will indeed. And now on to the non-fiction. Do you want to start us off?
Yes, the non-fiction for me is going to be Adrian Goldsworthy's Philip and Alexander.
Great book.
And there are probably 5 million books about Alexander. Was he great? Who knows? No, he wasn't. He was just very good at killing people, basically.
Great, according to the hegemonic values of the time.
Man, he was crazy.
Yeah.
But what I love about Philip and Alexander by Adrian Goldsworthy is that it is a groundbreaking book to, exploring the way that Philip of Macedon, Alexander's father, really is responsible for Alexander the Great's rise into power.
He laid the foundations.
Laid some incredible foundations.
Put Macedon back on the map.
Exactly, and it was just, I think it's just such a brilliant book. And if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of Alexander, but also his relationship with his father, then go for this book, because it's just superb.
Yeah, I've read quite a bit about Alexander, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a second with one of my picks.
Okay.
But my favourite non-fiction reads of this period are more about kind of the surrounding figures. And Philip, the first half, it's not quite halfway, I think just before half, of Adrian Goldsworthy's non-fiction here. I adored the Philip part. I found it so fascinating, and it's something that hasn't been talked about as much before.
Yeah.
And then on to me, I've got something which Philip and Alexander goes from before to during Alexander's reign, and I have got Ghost on the Throne, which looks at the aftermath. He is the ghost standing there as his successors are fighting out to see who will rule his kingdom. A lot of people say, I think there's an epithet, I've forgotten the exact words, but you can tell how good a ruler is by how long their rule lasts beyond their death. Alexander,
3 minutes.
By that account, he failed.
Yeah.
Because whilst he, of course, crafted one of the biggest kingdoms of all time, which for then, yeah, you're seen as a good ruler if you do that. I don't think morality was really his main concern.
He wasn't a good ruler. He was he was a good expander.
Exactly.
He was a conqueror.
If he lived longer, would he have maintained that? It's a bit the question with Henry V.
He would not have gone home.
It's the question of Henry V.
Yeah.
Did he die at his peak, and that's why people remember him so fondly now, and he's been kind of put down as England's greatest warrior king, and Dan Jones would put it.
He did get shot in the face, though, Will.
That is true.
And he just took it on the chin.
He just took, which is a hard thing to do. But with Ghost on the Throne,
I don't think took it on the chin has enough.
That was quite good. Sorry, I should have picked up on that. But Ghost on the Throne, back to the. I'm sorry. Yeah, right, Ghost on the Throne. I love that it looks at each of the potential successors, their actions, why they were worthy. It kind of jumps from Alexander's reign to after, and I like that it does it in kind of jumping between timelines of. Yeah. Combating a character, their story, then moving on to the next, instead of just a linear explanation over time. I like that it kept you on your feet a bit, and I love the way that this story is told by James Rom. And there are some just really interesting bits of information that I had no idea. Yeah. And I love little bits and pieces and bits of gold that the authors know people will be interested in, even if it is a tiny bit off tangent.
Yeah. We will in the future be doing an ancient history TBR of all the different non-fiction as well as fiction books that we want to read. But please, before we do that video, let us know in the comments below what books would you recommend set in this period we should be reading. I've almost read all of Stephen Pressfield's work now, so I've got a couple more to go. But there are so many more authors out there, so many more books. But sometimes it's hard to find a really solid historical fiction book that is groundbreaking, that is different to kind of the typical military historical fiction. Yeah. And I think all of these books, either that it's the best military book that that is up there that we've read, or they're groundbreaking in a different way. Yeah, they do something very different, and most of these do something completely unique. And they're books that we love. We wouldn't be recommending them if we didn't love them. It's true. And these are also ones that we think a lot of people would enjoy as well. But everyone, thank you so much for joining. Let us know some of your recommendations. Let us know if you'll pick any of these up. And just let us know how your reading is going in general. Thank you for your time. Truth and Courage, the Brothers Gwynne. Truth and Courage, the Brothers Gwynne.